A large ceremony at Highgate Cemetery. Lord Ashton's funeral. An important man. A wealthy man. And when men like that die, half of London shows up. Some are genuinely sad. Some come out of obligation. And some, frankly, are curious whether their name appears in the will. Anyway, James was there. The Duke of Northwood. He had done business with Ashton. A few shared investments. A few meetings. They weren't particularly close, but he had to attend. That's how these things work. He stood under his umbrella, listening to the priest. Well, listening might be a bit generous. His mind was somewhere else. He was looking around. You know those moments during ceremonies? Everyone puts on the same face. Sad, serious, head slightly bowed. James was studying those faces one by one, and then he stopped. At the edge of the crowd, beside a large plane tree, he noticed a woman. A young woman. Black dress, black hat, just like everyone else. But there was one difference. She wasn't crying. Think about it. Everyone around her was at least pretending. Waving a handkerchief, narrowing their eyes, doing something. But this woman, nothing. Her face was completely still, her eyes dry, her hands folded in front of her, standing straight. James couldn't look away, because there was something in that face. Sadness? No. Anger? Not quite. It was more like relief. As if she had finally released a breath she'd been holding for a very long time. The ceremony ended. The crowd began to disperse. James was still watching her. The woman lifted her head, for just a moment, and looked at the grave. There was nothing in her eyes. She hadn't mourned this man, not at all. Then she turned and left, disappearing into the crowd. James stayed where he was. A friend beside him touched his arm. "Shall we go?" he asked. James murmured something, but his mind was still on that woman. That night, when he returned home, he asked his butler about it. Lord Ashton had an adopted daughter, a girl named Rose. James walked to the window and looked outside. Why wasn't she crying? To understand Rose, I need to tell you a few things. Picture an 8-year-old child. Her mother has just died. Her father was never around. Rose didn't even know who he was. And standing at the door is Lord Ashton. Handsome, well-dressed, hat in his hand. Turning to the neighbors, he says, "I'll take the child. She can grow up with me." The neighbors said, "What a kind man." Rose packed her small suitcase, and that's when everything began. Ashton's house was large, 5 stories, on one of the finest streets in Mayfair, every room like a different world. When Rose first walked in, she saw a kind of wealth she had never imagined. Crystal chandeliers, marble staircases, paintings covering the walls. But within that beauty, Rose's place was clear. The back stairs, the servants' corridor, the small room next to the kitchen. Ashton never said it out loud, of course. Things like that are never said directly. They just happen. You wake up early in the morning, help with the housework, take lessons when the tutor comes. But you eat with the servants. When guests arrive, you disappear. Lady Ashton barely even looks at you. Rose understood. Quickly. Because children understand these things very quickly. A brief pause. If you want to support us and not miss new stories, please consider subscribing to the channel. Years passed. Rose grew up. And this is where the story changes a little. Because Rose was beautiful. Truly beautiful. The kind of beauty that makes people notice when she enters a room. Conversations pause. Heads turn. Ashton noticed too. But don't misunderstand. Ashton's interest was something entirely different. Calculated. Cold. He thought to himself, he had a beautiful, young adopted daughter. What would happen if he introduced her into London's social season? People would say, what a kind man taking care of this girl. Ashton's reputation would shine. So that's what he did. Rose attended her first ball at 17. Ashton had a dress made for her for that season. One dress. It was beautiful, yes, but it was only one dress. While the other girls had dozens in their wardrobes, Rose wore the same one again and again. No one asked why. On ball nights, Ashton would take Rose with him, introduce her to the right people, smiling proudly. "My adopted daughter," he would say. Rose would smile too, because she had to, and when they returned home, Rose would go upstairs by the back staircase again. Why did Rose endure this life? Because she had nowhere else to go. That part is important. You have to understand it. Her mother was gone. Her father was unknown. There was no money. Her education was incomplete. A woman alone in London, with no money and no connections. What could she do? At that time, the options were very limited. Domestic service at best, the streets at worst. At Ashton's house, at least there was a roof. There was food. There was safety. So Rose stayed quiet. She stayed quiet. She smiled. She climbed the back stairs. She wore her single dress. She stood beside Ashton at his balls. For years. But there was something inside Rose. She never showed it to anyone. But it was there. For those who paid attention, it was obvious. Those eyes. When Rose entered a room, she saw everything. Who looked at whom, what people were really thinking, which smiles were fake, and which were real. Years of silence sharpen a person. Rose had become a very sharp woman. And there was one more thing. When Ashton died, on that rainy November morning, at that crowded funeral, Rose did not cry. Because there was nothing to cry for. To cry, you need to lose something. Rose had not lost this man. She had never truly had him to begin with. And right at that moment, as she stood straight at the edge of the cemetery, a man in the crowd was watching her for a long time. Rose had felt it. But she didn't turn around. Because Rose had learned something throughout her life, attracting attention can be dangerous. But that man could not sleep that night. And Rose's story was far from over. Now let me tell you about James Calloway, the Duke of Northwood, 32 years old. One of the largest landowners in England, 3 estates in the north, a mansion in London, and considerable influence in Parliament. And let me put it this way. When James walks into a room, the air changes. It isn't just about height or good looks. It's something else. A certain weight about him. People notice. Conversations slow. Eyes drift toward him. The Duke of Northwood is here. Everyone knows it. In clubs, the best chair was always reserved for him. In restaurants, the finest table. At balls, mothers prepared their daughters, hoping that maybe, just maybe, tonight would be the night. In business meetings, no one argued with him. A powerful man. Yes. But now let me tell you the real part. Every morning, James would wake up, dress, and go downstairs. He would sit alone at the breakfast table, a long, grand table with both sides empty. The butler would arrive. "Good morning, sir." "Good morning," James would reply. The newspaper would come, coffee, eggs, every morning the same. Then meetings. People would come, sit, talk. Whenever James said something, everyone nodded. "Excellent idea, sir." "You're absolutely right. As you say, in the evening, the club. Friends, drinks, conversation. James would make a joke and everyone would laugh. A little too much, actually. James noticed that. At night, he would return home. To the large mansion, the large bedroom, the large bed. And in that silence, James would feel something. It's difficult to describe exactly what it was. Not loneliness. Loneliness is what people feel when no one is around. There were always people around James. But those people, were they real? Let me ask it this way. Have you ever sat in a room with more than 30 people and still felt like no one truly saw you? James felt that every single day. Once, about a year ago, James had opened up to his close friend Edward. Just a single sentence. "Sometimes I feel like everyone says the same thing to me," he had said. Edward laughed. "What are you talking about? You're the most powerful man in England." James nodded. "Yes," he said. "You're right." And he never spoke about it again. Now the question is, was James always like this? No. When he was a child, he was different. His mother used to tell stories about it. He was curious, always asking questions, sitting in the garden for hours watching insects, chatting with the cook in the kitchen. He didn't think about class differences. He looked at people, really looked at them. Then his father took over his education. "You will become the Duke of Northwood," his father had said. "You must have presence, distance. People must respect you." And James learned. He learned very well. He learned distance. He learned posture. He learned how the air in a room should change when he entered it. But that curious child, the boy who watched insects, who spoke with the cook, who truly looked at people, had been left somewhere along the way. Deep inside him. Sometimes it surfaced. Rarely. But it did. That was what happened on the day of the funeral. As James stood under his umbrella at Ashton's ceremony, that curious child lifted his head for a moment, and he saw the woman standing at the edge of the crowd beside the plane tree. She wasn't crying, and James, the Duke of Northwood, the most feared man in England, the man everyone had said yes to for 32 years, felt something unexpected inside him at that moment. Curiosity. Real, simple, almost childlike curiosity. Who is this woman? Why isn't she crying? What does she know about this man that the rest of us don't? That night, when he returned to the mansion, he asked the butler, Rose, the adopted daughter, living in Ashton's house since she was 8. James thought about it for a while, and then he felt something difficult to describe, like a small movement inside something that had been frozen for a long time. Small. But there. 3 days after the funeral, James took action. He didn't wait long. Someone else might have laughed it off. How ridiculous. Investigating a woman I saw at a funeral. But James couldn't dismiss it. The feeling of curiosity hadn't gone away. In fact, it had grown a little. He asked his butler, what was happening at Ashton's house now? What was the family doing? Was there any kind of social gathering planned soon? The butler returned the next day. Lady Ashton, less than a week after her husband's death, was hosting a tea gathering. Was she mourning? Not exactly. But life in London continued, especially for those curious about the contents of the will. James had not received an invitation, but he wrote a letter to someone who certainly had. The gathering took place at Ashton's mansion in Mayfair, a large drawing room, 30 or 40 guests, women on one side, men on the other, tea and cakes in the middle. These London gatherings were always the same. Everyone watching everyone else, what they were wearing, who was speaking to whom, who looked the most appropriately sad. When James entered, the room noticed. It always happened that way. Conversations slowed. Eyes shifted toward him. James was used to it. He barely even registered it anymore. He greeted the right people, said the proper sentences, took a glass in his hand. Then he scanned the room. He didn't see Rose at first. Then he spotted her, standing by the window, alone, looking outside. She held a cup of tea but wasn't drinking it. She was simply standing there. James approached. "Miss Rose, isn't it?" Rose turned. She looked at James, and there was nothing in that look. No excitement, no shock, the Duke of Northwood. She simply looked at him. "Yes," she said. Her voice was calm. "James Calloway. Northwood." "I know," Rose said. That was all. She didn't say, "It's an honor to meet you," she didn't say. What a surprise. Nothing. James smiled slightly to himself. Interesting. He stepped beside her and looked out the window. The garden was visible, trees yellowing and shedding their leaves in November. "You must miss Lord Ashton very much," James said. He was testing her a little, if we're being honest. Rose waited for a second. "Everyone is very sad," she said. She hadn't answered the question, but not answering was also an answer. James looked at her. At that moment, the room burst into laughter. Someone across the room had made a joke. One of Lady Ashton's close friends, an elderly, heavy man who repeated the same jokes at every gathering. Everyone laughed. The women covered their mouths with handkerchiefs, the men lifted their glasses. James laughed too, automatically, out of habit. Then he looked at Rose. Rose wasn't laughing. She was looking at her cup. Her face was neutral, as if the joke had never been said at all. James paused. His laugh faded halfway through, and something happened in that moment. Difficult to explain, but this is the closest way to describe it. All his life, whenever James made a joke, everyone laughed. Sometimes it was actually funny, sometimes it wasn't. But people laughed, because James was the Duke of Northwood, and when the Duke of Northwood said something, people laughed. But Rose had not laughed, and for the first time, James wondered, was it actually funny? "Did it bore you?" James asked quietly, just loud enough for Rose to hear. Rose lifted her head and looked at him. That gaze, the one that seemed to see everything. "No," she said. "I just didn't find anything to laugh at." She paused, then added, very calmly, very naturally, "You didn't either, actually. But you laughed." James froze, because she was right, completely right. And no one had ever said something like that to him before. Something stirred inside him. That curious child, the one he had hidden deep inside, the one his father had told to stay where it was, took another step forward. He wanted to speak. He wanted to speak more. Who was this woman? What did she think? What did she feel? Why hadn't she cried at the funeral? "Rose." Lady Ashton's voice came from the other side of the room, sharp, brief. Rose straightened. She set her cup down and turned to James. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was steady, but something passed through her eyes. Brief, almost invisible. Fatigue, perhaps, or anger. It was difficult to tell. She turned and left. James remained where he was. He looked at the glass in his hand. The rest of the room continued talking, laughing, chatting. Everything seemed normal, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened for James. That woman had looked him in the face and calmly said, "You didn't find it funny either, but you laughed." And James realized something. The sentence hadn't offended him. Quite the opposite. For the first time in a long while, someone had actually seen him. Not the suit. Not the title. Him. And now that woman was gone. James returned to his mansion early that night. He went to his study and sat down. He thought for a long time. Then he called for the butler. "Ashton's house. Are the legal matters still ongoing? The will and all that?" "Yes, sir. The lawyers are still working." James nodded. "Have my lawyer contact Ashton's family. We had a few joint investment matters. We'll need to discuss them." "I understand, sir. When should I arrange it?" James thought for a second. "This week." The excuse was ready. Now all he needed was for Rose to be there again. The meeting with the lawyer took place at Ashton House. James's lawyer had sent word in advance. Apparently, some of Ashton's investment papers were missing signatures, and they needed someone from the household to witness a few details. A formal, dull, bureaucratic matter. Lady Ashton did not attend. She found this sort of thing boring. She told the butler, "Send the adopted girl." So Rose came. It was a small study. A desk, a few chairs, Ashton's portraits on the wall. James sat on one side of the table, his lawyer beside him. Rose sat opposite them. The lawyer began speaking. Documents, dates, signatures. Rose listened and gave short answers to the questions. Yes, no, I don't know. I was in the house at the time. James said nothing. He only watched. Rose was looking through the papers carefully, reading every line. Most people in that kind of meeting would either grow bored or irritated. Rose was neither. It was as if she was storing every word in her mind. The meeting ended. The lawyer gathered his papers and left the room. James stood up. Rose stood as well. "Thank you," James said. "We've taken up your time." "It's all right," Rose replied. She turned and walked toward the door. "Would you like some coffee?" Rose stopped. She did not turn immediately. She waited for a second, and who knows what she thought in that 1 second. Then she turned, looked at James. "Why?" she asked. A direct question. She did not say, "Thank you, no." She did not say, "How improper." She simply asked, "Why?" James laughed. Naturally, not a polite or practiced laugh. "Because I want to talk," he said. Rose looked at him for a long moment. "All right," she said at last. They moved into the sitting room. The butler brought coffee and left. The two of them were alone. James began directly, without circling around it. "I saw you at the funeral." Rose looked down at her cup. She was not surprised. She had already known. She had felt his eyes on her. "I know," she said. "You weren't crying." Silence. Rose lifted her head. She looked at James with that level gaze, the one that seemed to see everything. "No," she said. "I wasn't." "Why not?" A long silence followed. Outside, the sound of a carriage passed by, faded, and then there was silence again. Rose could have said nothing. She could have stood up and left. She could have said, "That is none of your concern." She didn't. Maybe she was tired of hiding it. Maybe the plainness of James's question loosened something inside her. Maybe, in that room, on that day, she simply wanted to be honest once. "Because to grieve, you have to lose something," she said. Her voice was steady, not trembling. "I did not lose that man. I never had him to begin with." James said nothing. Rose went on. Perhaps she had not planned to, but the words came anyway. "I came to this house when I was 8. My mother had died, and I had nowhere else to go. Ashton seemed like a good man. He seemed that way to people." She paused. "To people." You should have heard the way she said those last words. Her tone had not changed. It was still calm. But there were years inside that phrase. Swallowed anger, swallowed tears, everything she had swallowed. James felt something tighten inside him. "And what did he seem like to you?" he asked quietly. Rose turned her head and looked out the window. The garden was visible. November's bare, cold garden. "Like a tool," she said. "A pretty tool, taken to gatherings, shown to people, brought back home. That was all." She paused. "But there was a roof. There was food. At least you were safe," James began. Rose turned to him. "That look." James did not finish the sentence, because in that look he saw this. Being safe is not the same as being free. The silence stretched. In that silence, James thought of something. This woman had lived in this house for years, sat in these chairs every day, walked through these corridors, and no one had asked. No one had really looked. "Did you ever have anything that was truly yours?" he asked at last. "In this house. Something genuinely yours." Rose thought about it. She truly thought about it. She did not answer at once. "Books," she said. "Books I took from the library. No one noticed." "What did you read?" And for the first time, Rose did something very small. She smiled. Not quite a full smile, more a slight movement at the corners of her mouth, almost invisible. But James saw it. Everything, Rose said. History, geography, sometimes philosophy. Once I read Ashton's books on economics. I like numbers. Numbers. Numbers do not lie, Rose said. Plainly, simply. People do. Numbers don't. At that moment, James felt something. Admiration, perhaps. Or being struck by someone. It is hard to find the exact word. But this is the best way to explain it. James had met many women in his life. Beautiful women, intelligent women, educated women. Whenever they spoke to him, they wanted something. Attention, approval, perhaps marriage. They were all performing in one way or another. Rose was not performing. She was simply sitting there, drinking her coffee, talking about the books she had stolen from the library years ago. She was not false, not in any way. And something about that caught hold of James. "What happens now?" James asked. "Ashton is gone." "The will." "I don't know what the will says," Rose replied. Her voice had not changed, but something passed through her eyes. A brief shadow. "But I doubt it says anything good." She paused. "It's all right," she said. "I'll manage somehow." Look at the way she said that. I'll manage somehow. She did not ask for help. She did not try to make herself pitiful. She simply said it, as if she had always managed somehow, and this time would be no different. When James heard that sentence, something strange happened inside him. Part admiration, part, how can I put it, a kind of pressure in his chest. This woman was so used to carrying everything alone that asking for help did not even seem to occur to her. Rose stood. "If you'll excuse me," she said. James stood as well. "Of course." Rose walked to the door. James watched her from behind. At the door, she turned. She looked at James, brief but direct. "Why did you ask me those things?" she said. "Really?" James waited for a second. "Because no one has," he said. "Not before." Rose looked at him, that look again, measuring, searching, sinking in. She searched for something in James's eyes. We do not know what she found. Then she turned and left. James remained in the room. The coffee cups were still on the table. Outside, the noise of London. Everything was normal. But one sentence kept circling in James's mind. Numbers do not lie. People do. This woman had lived in that house since she was 8, and no one had ever really looked at her. No one had ever really asked. And that made James angry. He was surprised at himself for that. Why was he angry? It was none of his business. He did not know Rose. He had seen her for the second time only an hour earlier. But he was angry. And beneath that anger, there was something else too. Something he had not yet named and wasn't ready to name. When he returned to his mansion, he said something to the butler. "Ashton's old servants. Are any of the long-serving ones still in the house?" "A few, sir." "Why do you ask?" James took off his coat and handed it to him. "I want to speak to them." James began the investigation the next morning. He did not ask directly, of course. He did not say, "Tell me everything about Rose." That was not how it was done. It would have been too obvious, and people would have shut down. He did it more carefully. Through his lawyer, he met with Ashton's former accountant. Household expenses, spending, budget allocations. The accountant was an old, tired man, already retired, no longer loyal to anyone. He talked. Then one of Ashton's butlers. The man had worked in the house for 12 years and had recently started looking for a new position. They happened to meet at a club. James ordered drinks. Conversation followed. And then a kitchen maid, a woman in her 60s, who had done this work for 40 years. She talked the most. After every conversation, James returned to his mansion, sat at his desk, and thought about what he had learned. Now let me tell you. The room. Do you know which room Rose was given when she first arrived at this house at 8 years old? The small room next to the kitchen. One window, facing the courtyard, which meant no morning sun, no evening light. It was a servant's room. Before Rose, the laundry woman had used it. There was no special room set aside for the adopted daughter. There never was. Rose grew up, and the room stayed the same. The servants around her changed. Some left, some arrived. But Rose's room never changed. Always that small room facing the courtyard, the one that never saw the morning sun. When James learned this, he said nothing. He simply set the pen down on his desk. Ashton's house laid out grand tables. When guests came, there were 6 or 7 courses, the finest wines, desserts. Lady Ashton cared deeply about the table. It was a matter of pride for her. Rose did not sit at that table. On days without guests, which meant most days, Rose ate in the kitchen, with the servants, a separate plate, a separate table. Sometimes the food was the same, sometimes it wasn't. During the social season, before balls or important gatherings, Rose would go upstairs. She would sit at Ashton's table, well-dressed, her hair arranged, eating with the proper cutlery, the adopted daughter. When the gathering ended, she would go downstairs again. While describing this, the accountant had said something. She was upstairs when she was useful to the master. When she wasn't, she was downstairs. When James heard that sentence, something tightened inside him. The dresses. This was the part people talked about the most. During London's social season, women spent money on dresses. That was normal, expected. Even for a single ball, there were usually several options. Do you know how many dresses Rose had? 3. 3 dresses over 3 years. 1 for daily wear, 1 slightly better, 1 for gatherings. The gathering dress, black and dark green, simple cut but good fabric, had been made by Ashton. It wasn't Rose's money. She didn't have money. Servants were paid, little, but still something. Rose was not. Why would she be? She was adopted. There was a roof, there was food. Why would she need money? When the kitchen maid described this, her eyes had filled with tears. The girl never complained, she had said. Not once. I saw once in winter that her coat had torn. I didn't say anything because what could I do? But she didn't say anything either. She sewed it herself. That night, James was still sitting at his desk. Late. There was nothing in front of him. No paper. No pen. He was simply sitting there, thinking. The woman who had not cried at Ashton's funeral. That steady gaze. Those sharp sentences. The way she had said numbers do not lie. The way she had said, I'll manage somehow. Now he understood. This woman had spent her entire life protecting herself. No one had protected her. No one had stood behind her. A small girl, motherless, penniless, dropped into the wrong house. And she had survived. By staying quiet. By observing. By learning from books. By sewing her single dress herself. She had survived. James wasn't entirely sure what he felt. Anger? Yes, partly. Toward Ashton, the man who had worn the mask of kindness while using that girl for years. A little anger toward London itself. No one had asked. No one had looked. Was it pity? No, James felt that very clearly. He did not pity Rose. Rose wasn't someone to be pitied. You did not pity the woman who sat across from you and calmly said, "Numbers do not lie." You admired her. So what was this feeling? He stood and walked to the window. London at night was beautiful. Gas lamps, the faint shine of the Thames in the distance, the occasional carriage passing by. James had looked at this view hundreds of times. It had never seemed this different before. A thought came to him. What was Rose doing right now? In that large house, in that small room, alone. What was she doing? Ashton was dead. The will had not yet been opened. Her future was uncertain. And Rose had said, "I'll manage somehow." But how would she manage? She had no money, no connections. A woman alone in London, in her 20s, with nothing in her hands. James did not make a decision at that moment. Not yet. But he felt one thing clearly. This woman's story should not end in that small room, in that silence. The next morning, he woke early. He told the butler only one thing. "When is Ashton's will being read?" "Friday, sir. 3 days from now." James nodded. "Call my lawyer." Rose had learned 2 days earlier. One of Ashton's former butlers, the man who had worked in the house for 12 years and was now looking for work, had told a kitchen maid. The maid had told someone else. That was how secrets spread in London, from ear to ear, from corridor to corridor. The Duke of Northwood was asking questions about Rose. What did Rose feel when she heard that? The first feeling was anger. Hard, sudden, familiar anger, because Rose had been examined all her life. Ashton had taken her to gatherings, and people had looked, her clothes, her posture, her smile. For years she had been evaluated like an object, and now this man, this Duke, was gathering information through the back door, speaking with servants, looking into the darkest corners of her life. She had not allowed that. No one had asked. On the third day, James came to Ashton's mansion. This wasn't an official visit. No lawyers this time. He simply arrived. At the door, he told the butler, "I would like to see Miss Rose." The butler went inside and returned. "The lady is not expecting you, sir." James waited for a second. "Tell her I am here." The butler went inside again. This time when he returned, he said, "You may come in." Rose was in the small sitting room. She was standing. She had not sat down. This was deliberate. Sitting would have suggested comfort. Rose was not comfortable, and she wanted that to be clear. James entered. He looked at Rose. Rose looked at him. That look, as always, steady, seeing everything. But this time there was something else in it. Defense. "Lord Calloway," Rose said. Her voice was cold, formal. The faint openness that had existed in their earlier conversation was gone now, closed. "Miss Rose," James held his hat in his hands and did not step too far inside. "I apologize for disturbing you." "If you did not come to apologize," Rose said flatly, "and if your curiosity has already been satisfied, then there is no need." The room fell silent. James looked at her. Rose did not look away. "I'm sorry you heard about it," James said. "I did not try to keep it secret, but you did it without asking," Rose said. Her voice had not risen. It never did. It hadn't for years. But every word landed exactly where it should. "You spoke with the servants. You spoke with the accountant. You asked about my life, my room, my dress." She paused. "Why?" James did not answer immediately, and Rose continued, still calm, still controlled, but something was burning beneath it. "I am not a mystery, Lord Calloway. I did not cry at the funeral, yes. There is a reason for that, yes. But that reason does not exist for your curiosity. My life is not a story for you." James listened to those sentences. She was right, completely right, and James knew it. But he also knew something else. He had to say it. Here, in this room, under the weight of that cold gaze. "You're right," he said. Rose seemed to expect an argument, a defense, an explanation. When none came, a small flicker of surprise passed through her eyes. James continued. "I did it without asking. That was wrong." He paused. "But I won't lie to you. My curiosity isn't going away." Silence. "It isn't," he repeated. His voice had softened. There was something vulnerable in it. Vulnerability in the voice of James Calloway, in the voice of the Duke of Northwood. "Since the moment I saw you, it hasn't gone away. And the more I learn, the more." He stopped. Rose looked at him. That measuring gaze again, the one that seemed to search beneath the surface. She was looking for something in his eyes. A game. Pity. Something else. What she found surprised her. It was real. This man meant what he was saying. It wasn't performance. It wasn't politeness. It wasn't a social maneuver. He was simply standing there, hat in his hands, saying, "My curiosity isn't going away." And in that moment, Rose felt something very dangerous, softening, small, almost invisible. But it was there. The wall she had built for years, silent, solid, letting no one in, trembled somewhere along its edge. Rose felt it, and she pulled herself back immediately. "If you'll excuse me," she said. Her voice was flat again. "I'm tired." James looked at her. He could have said something more, but he didn't. He lowered his head slightly. "Of course," he said. "Good evening, Miss Rose." He turned and walked toward the door. At the door, he stopped. He did not turn back. He simply spoke. "May I say one thing?" Rose did not answer, but she didn't leave either. James continued. "In that room, the small room where you hid your books, how many years did you sleep there?" Silence. 14 years, Rose said. Even she was surprised that she had answered. James nodded slowly, as if something was passing through his mind. 14 years, he repeated quietly. Then he left. Rose remained where she was. For a long time, the sound of the door closing came from outside. James had gone. A carriage rolled away in the distance, and then there was silence again. Rose was still standing there, in the same place. 14 years. Why had she said that? He hadn't demanded an answer. She didn't have to say anything. But the way he had asked it, the weight in his voice when he said 14 years, as if it actually mattered to him, as if he truly saw it. Rose closed her eyes. No. No, no, no. This was dangerous. She didn't know this man. Beautiful words were easy. Saying "my curiosity isn't going away" was easy. Tomorrow he could forget. The next day he could become someone else entirely. Rose had learned this her entire life. Things that looked good were not good. Doors opened and closed. Walls stayed. She left the room, walked through the corridor, went up the back stairs, the same back stairs she had always used. She entered the small room and closed the door. She sat on the bed. The courtyard was visible through the window. Dark, cold, a November night. And Rose, the woman who had not cried for years, who had stood at Ashton's funeral with dry eyes, who had said, "I'll manage somehow." That night, she cried. Quietly. Her shoulders trembled, but no sound came out. She had learned that, too, over the years. Even when she cried, she made no sound. Because it mustn't be heard. It mustn't be seen. Why did she cry? It's hard to say exactly. Maybe it wasn't for James, or not only for him. Maybe it was that question. 14 years. Maybe someone truly asking, truly caring, had pierced a small place in that wall. Maybe the weight of everything she had carried for so long had simply become too heavy that night. Or maybe it was this. For years, no one had asked. This man had. And Rose was not ready for that. She fell asleep near dawn. Her eyes were swollen, but no one noticed. She woke early in the morning, washed her face, and went downstairs. Just as she always did. But something inside her had changed. A small thing. But it had changed. The will was read on Friday, in Ashton's large study. A long table, lawyers on both sides, Lady Ashton and her 2 sons across from them. Rose sat at the very end, near the door, in the corner, exactly where she always sat. The lawyer began reading. The mansion to Lady Ashton, investments to the elder son, cash to the younger, small amounts to a few relatives. Rose waited. Her name was not mentioned. The lawyer turned the page. Rose's hands rested in her lap, clasped together, motionless. Her name appeared on the next page, but not in the way she expected. As the lawyer read, The room grew quiet. Lord Ashton had apparently wished to secure the future of his adopted daughter Rose. For that reason, he had arranged her engagement to Lord Harwick, a 58-year-old man who had been married twice, whose second wife had died the previous year. Everything had been organized in a letter attached to the will. Harwick had agreed. The wedding would take place in the spring. Nothing was left to Rose, because she would go to Harwick's house. Everything would be there. The room was silent. Lady Ashton lifted her head and looked at Rose. What was in her eyes? Pity? No. Relief. Rose was no longer her problem. The elder son whispered something to the lawyer. Rose did not move at all. What did she feel in that moment? It wasn't shock. It wasn't surprise. It was more like exhaustion. A deep, bone-deep exhaustion. As if the thing she had always expected had finally arrived. The worst possibility. And here it was. The lawyer closed the documents. Are there any questions? Rose stood up. No, she said. And she left the room. She stopped in the corridor. Leaning against the wall, she took a breath. Then another. Lord Harwick, 58 years old. Rose had seen him once, at one of Ashton's gatherings. Fat, old, with a smile that made her uneasy. That night she had gone down to the kitchen, drunk a glass of water, and forced herself to calm down. Now she was going to marry him. She would leave Ashton's house, yes. But where would she go? To Harwick's house. Another roof. Another room. Dressing nicely for someone else. Smiling at the right people. Climbing the back stairs when she returned home. Only the name would change. 2 days later, Lady Ashton summoned her. The Harwick family would like to see you, she said. Flat, formal, as if discussing the weather. Lunch next Wednesday. Rose looked at her. All right, she said. What else could she say? That night, she sat in her room. She looked out at the courtyard. Dark, cold, always the same view. Numbers, she said to herself. Numbers do not lie. What did the numbers say? She had no money, no connections. The will left her nothing. If she refused the engagement, where would she go? Domestic service? Perhaps. Sewing work? Perhaps. But alone in London, with no money and no acquaintances. The numbers did not say good things. Rose closed her eyes. And that night, for the first time, truly the first time, she accepted something. She was tired. Not of fighting alone. James heard the news the next day. His lawyer had informed him. He had been following the will matters anyway. A short note arrived. The Harwick arrangement. The spring wedding. Rose. James read the note. He set it on the desk. He stood up. Walked to the window. Returned. Sat down again. He read the note once more. Lord Harwick. James knew him. They sometimes crossed paths at the club. James usually ignored him. There was rarely anything proper to say about the man. But now that man's name sat there on the paper. And next to it was Rose's name. James stood. Prepare the carriage, he told the butler. When James arrived at Ashton's mansion, it was 2 in the afternoon. This time, the butler did not say she isn't expecting you. Because there was something on James's face. That unmistakable presence of the Duke of Northwood entering a room. No one stopped him. Rose was in the small sitting room. This time she was seated, by the window, a book in her hand. But she wasn't reading. The pages were open, yet her eyes were far away. James entered. Rose looked up. She wasn't surprised, as if she had been expecting him, or perhaps nothing surprised her anymore. You heard, Rose said. It wasn't a question. Yes. You hear things quickly. James sat down directly across from her. He placed his hat on the table. Harwick is not a good man, he said. I know. Rose. Lord Calloway. Rose closed the book. Her voice was calm, but something trembled beneath it. "Please, I know what you're about to say. And I can protect you." Silence. Rose looked at him, and James expected that look, the one that measured and examined. He saw something there. Pride. Hard, unbreakable pride that had kept her standing for years. "No," Rose said. Flat. One word. "Rose, no." She stood up, walked to the window and turned her back. "I've lived my entire life depending on someone. For a roof, for food, for safety. I don't want to move from one man's house to another man's house, from one cage to another." Her voice did not break, but the weight of the words filled the room. James remained seated. "And Harwick isn't a cage?" he asked quietly. Rose turned, looked at him. "At least it's a cage, I understand." That sentence, tired, hollow, almost broken, froze James in place, because he understood. This woman had been disappointed so many times that she preferred a known pain to an unknown one. At least she knew what awaited her. At least there would be no surprises. It made James angry. Angry at himself. Angry at the world. When the best option a woman has is a pain she already understands, something is terribly wrong. He stood up. He walked toward Rose. He didn't stop halfway. He came close. But he didn't touch her. He simply stood there in front of her. And he spoke. His voice came from somewhere entirely different. Not the voice of the Duke of Northwood, not the voice James used in meetings. Something simpler, more real. "What do you want?" Rose froze. "What?" "You," James said. "What do you want? Not Harwick, not me, not Lady Ashton. You, Rose. What do you want?" Silence. Rose opened her mouth, closed it again. No one had ever asked her that. Not once in her life. Ashton had told her what he needed. Lady Ashton had told her where she belonged. The will had decided where she would go. But no one had asked what she wanted. No one had cared. Rose's eyes filled with tears. She held them back. She always did. But this time, under that question, under the sound of James's voice, holding them back became harder. "I don't know," she said. Her voice broke slightly, almost imperceptibly. "No one ever asked, so I never thought about it." And when she said that, something happened. The wall she had built for years, the wall that held everything inside, cracked somewhere. James took another step closer. "Think," he said. "Now. I'm here. Think." Rose looked at him. Her eyes were full, but the tears hadn't fallen. She was still holding them back. She was so used to holding them back. "I want to leave," she said at last. Her voice was very quiet. "This house. Not the city. Just this house. I want to live by my own decisions. I want to wake up in the morning and decide for myself what I will do that day." She paused. "That's all. It isn't much." James looked at her. "It isn't," he said. "Not at all." And something changed in the room at that moment. It wasn't dramatic. No one shouted, no one cried. Two people were simply standing across from each other. One had spoken honestly about what she wanted for the first time. The other had truly listened for the first time. Rose did not wipe her eyes. The tears had gathered, but had not fallen. She simply looked at James. "I still don't understand why you care," she said. James thought about it. He truly thought. He didn't answer quickly. "I'm not sure I fully understand it myself," he said finally. "But not understanding it doesn't mean I don't care." Rose looked at him for a long time. And in that look, James saw something for the first time. Behind the wall, behind the silence, deep in those tired eyes. Trust. Small, fragile, newly born. But it was there. "I meet Harwick on Wednesday," Rose said. "I know. What will you do until then?" James picked up his hat, walked to the door, then turned. "I'll speak with Harwick." Rose's eyes widened. "James!" It was the first time she had used his name. They both noticed. Rose hesitated. James stopped. A small silence filled the space between them. Warm, quiet. "Lord Calloway," Rose corrected softly. James smiled. A small, genuine smile. "James is fine," he said. Then he left. Rose walked to the window. James's carriage was visible outside. Black, large, waiting. It began to move, rolled down the street, and disappeared. Rose kept looking at the place where it had been. There was a strange feeling inside her. Fear? A little? Hope? Perhaps. Maybe both. She placed her hand on the window glass. It was cold. "What do you want?" No one had ever asked. This man had. James found Harwick on Tuesday. At the club. Afternoon. Corner table. A glass in his hand. Newspaper open. That was how Harwick spent his days. Comfortably. Heavily. Like a man for whom nothing was ever urgent. James sat at the table without asking. Harwick looked up. Raised an eyebrow. "Calloway. This doesn't look like something I was expecting." "You weren't," James said. "But we need to talk." A waiter approached. James waved him away before he could speak. The waiter left. Harwick folded his newspaper slowly, lazily. "What about?" "Ashton's will," James said, leaning slightly forward. His voice was low but firm. "Rose." Harwick laughed, short and careless. "Ah, that matter." He lifted his glass. "What about it?" "Ashton and I made an arrangement. The will is valid. Everything is—" "It's finished," James said. Harwick stopped. The glass remained suspended in the air. "Excuse me?" James looked at him directly. That Duke of Northwood look. The one that changed the air in a room. The one that made people freeze where they stood. "That engagement will not happen," he said. "And I'm only going to say this once." Harwick's face changed. First confusion, then redness, then that inflated expression of wounded pride. Who does this man think he is, speaking to me like this? "Wait a moment," he said, his voice rising. "This is my business, Calloway. Ashton and I." "Ashton is dead," James said calmly. Very calmly. "And that will not survive in court. My lawyers have been looking into it since this morning." That was half true, half a threat. But Harwick didn't know which half. James continued. "If you drop this quietly, the matter ends. If you don't, the will, Ashton's old debts, your connections to them, all of it will surface. Newspapers tend to enjoy that sort of thing." Harwick froze. A long silence followed. The noise of the club continued around them. Laughter, glasses clinking, conversations at other tables. But in this corner, between these two men, the air had turned cold. Harwick placed his glass down on the table. "I see," he said finally. His voice had dropped, angry but defeated. James stood up, buttoned his coat, took his hat. "Good day, Lord Harwick." Then he walked out. On Wednesday morning, a note arrived for Rose. Short, sealed with Harwick's crest. The engagement was withdrawn. Circumstances have changed, it said. No further explanation. Rose read the note. Once. Twice. Then she placed it on the table. Lady Ashton appeared at the door 10 minutes later. There was a strange expression on her face. Anger, perhaps, or confusion. Something in between. "Harwick has withdrawn," she said. "I read it," Rose replied. "In that case, in this house." "I know," Rose said. "There's no place for me here anymore." Lady Ashton might have expected begging, perhaps tears. Rose did neither. She stood up and walked to the wardrobe. She took out her suitcase. 3 dresses. 2 books she once read again and again. Not her father's. Not truly hers. They had been Ashton's books from the library, ones she had secretly read over the years. She didn't have them now, but she knew them by heart. Word for word. A small necklace from her mother, that she had always kept hidden. No one even knew it existed. That was all. The same suitcase. The same contents. Exactly what she had carried when she first entered this house. But the girl who had entered and the woman who was leaving were not the same. She walked out through the front door of the mansion for the first time. She noticed it, only for a second, but she noticed. She had always left through the back door, like the servants. This time, the front door. A small thing, but it mattered. She paused on the steps. London stretched before her, noisy, cold, gray. A suitcase in her hand, almost no money in her pocket, uncertainty ahead. And that was when she saw James's carriage. It stood across the street. James was waiting beside it, not inside, but outside. Standing, hat in his hand. Rose stepped down the stairs, crossed the street. She stopped in front of him, looked at him. "Did you do this?" "Yes." Harwick understood the situation. Rose waited a second, her suitcase in her hand, the wind moving her hair, London as loud as ever around them. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you do this?" James looked at her, and he answered, not with a speech, not with something prepared, just one sentence. "Because you deserve what you want." Everything around them seemed to go quiet. Of course it didn't. London never went silent. Horses passed, people spoke. Somewhere in the distance a bell rang. But for Rose, in that moment, everything stopped. Because that sentence, that simple, small, 5-word sentence, was something no one had ever said to her before. "You deserve it." Ashton had never said it. Lady Ashton had never said it. No one had ever said it. This man had. Rose's eyes filled with tears. This time, she didn't stop them. She didn't even try. 2 quiet drops fell. James took a step forward, then stopped. "If you'll allow it," he said quietly, "there's a place where you can stay for now. Somewhere safe. We can think about the rest together." Rose looked at him. That same measuring gaze. Careful. Searching. She looked into his eyes again, searching for something. A game. Pity. Something else. What she found was the same thing she had seen every time. Something real. "Together?" Rose asked. James smiled. A small, genuine smile that came easily. "Together." Rose looked at him for another second. Then she held out her suitcase. James took it. And they walked. "Now I'll let you go. But first I want to say something. The part of this story that moved me the most wasn't the moment Harwick withdrew. It wasn't the moment Rose saw James's carriage. The strongest moment was something smaller than that, when Rose walked out through the front door. Small, isn't it? Maybe no one else would notice. But for a woman who had spent 14 years leaving through the back door, that single step meant everything. Sometimes freedom doesn't arrive in a grand moment. Sometimes it arrives in something as small as walking out the front door. Thank you very much for watching this story until the end. I want you to know this. Every comment, every thought, every message saying continue helps me keep telling these stories. Write in the comments where you're watching from. I read every one of them, truly. New stories are on the way, so don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss them. See you in the next story.